I'm going to make a start. Just to let you know that this session will be recorded, and I hope that's okay with everyone. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Lindsay Butterworth, and I'm one of the senior nursing and midwifery workforce leads here at NHS England for the whole of the North East and Yorkshire region, and I'll be guiding you through today's session. Hopefully, you are all here to join the webinar for the NMC's Practice Learning Review Consultation. This is the second of our webinars, so hopefully you're all in the right room for the right reason. I'm joined today by two wonderful colleagues from the NMC. So I've got Jackie Williams, Senior Midwifery Advisor, and Julie Bliss, who's also Senior Nursing Education Advisor, but I'll let them introduce themselves in just a minute. I have got the wonderful Paul, who's also on the call. He'll be assisting me with admin and keeping me on track a little bit from our IT perspectives and hopefully controlling our Q&A session. So it's really nice to see so many of you on the call today. We've got educators, registrants and some students hopefully coming along today. So that should be really good. What we'd like to do is just kind of have a really good conversation, ask questions whilst we've got Jackie and Julie in the room. And it's our time to develop that future curriculum for the changes across nursing. And I'll hand over to Jackie and Julie to introduce themselves and get the session started.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I'm Julie Bliss. I'm a Senior Nursing Education Advisor here at the Nursing and Midwifery Council. Been here about 3 years, came from higher education, where the last role that I had was as Associate Dean for Practice Learning. So I'm delighted to be working on this Practice Learning review. I am in the language of the NMC, I think the delivery lead, which is at times, oh God, sorry, both exciting and scary. But I'm very delighted that we're working on this with the team, which includes the lovely Jackie, who will now introduce herself.
Thanks, Julie. And I'm Jackie Williams, and I'm a Senior Midwifery Advisor at the NMC with a particular portfolio for education. My background is also in higher education, latterly as a lead midwife for education. Been at the NMC, well, gosh, coming up to 9 years now. Still practice clinically, so that's probably where the delivery part comes for me, Julie, and been leading on the midwifery part of this work, supporting Julie and the rest of the team. And I think it's worth saying that, yeah, we're just a week away now from close of consultation. We urge you to still complete your survey, either as an individual or as a group. Nothing has been decided. These are proposals. We want your views. We want your solutions. So do give them today will help you hopefully clarify how you want to complete the consultation. So over to you, Julie.
Thanks, Jackie. So Jackie and I just said we're both educators at heart. So at this point, I'll apologise that the slides have got too much text on them, but we won't use all of the slides. But the thing is, we want you to have them afterwards. We're happy for Lindsay to share them. So we're hoping that they'll be a useful resource. So we are doing the review of practice learning, and some of you may be very familiar with this. Some of you it may be newer information. We set the standards for nursing and midwifery and nursing associate pre-registration programmes. The core of the NMC work really is about protection of the public, and council agreed that we would look at practice learning in January 2023. So in January 2024 we started the practice learning review. The practice learning review is only looking at practice learning focused education standards. The proficiencies aren't in scope at this stage. At some point in the future, the NMC will review the full suite of pre-registration standards. That would be normal best practice to look at the full suite. As you'll know, we had a bit of a hiccup, slight understatement, with the pandemic, where we had a number of iterations of emergency and recovery standards, and therefore we've been waiting to ensure that there's been cohorts through the programmes. So that work will happen in the future. We don't know when at the moment, because obviously we're doing the practice learning review, the code and revalidation review, and also work on advanced practice. So at the beginning of the practice learning review, we undertook some discovery work, and that included commissioning some independent research which was undertaken by the Nuffield Trust in partnership with the Florence Nightingale Foundation. And they found some really good examples of positive practice learning experiences, but also identified that there is some variation and inconsistency. Variation's okay, consistency perhaps not so. We also used the mandatory education and quality assurance exceptional reporting for education QA and the evaluation of simulated practice learning for nursing programs that was also published in 2024. This led us to 5 key lines of inquiry. You definitely can't read this now, but it will hopefully be helpful later. We wanted to explore the experiences of students with protected characteristics, so the full range of protected characteristics, but particularly thinking about reasonable adjustments and the impact of reasonable adjustments on the practice learning experience and retention. We also wanted to think about the experience of students, practice supervisors and practice assessors during practice learning. We're very mindful of the fact that practice supervisors and practice assessors are delivering care as well as supporting practice learning. And we wanted to examine whether or not there were any what are the indicators of a quality practice learning experience. And needless to say, those key lines of inquiry very much overlapped with one another. The final 2 key lines of inquiry, one was looking at the midwifery curricula and one at the nursing curricula. And that was really to understand how programmes are put together and how it works, how are students supported to achieve the requirements for registration within practice learning. What we identified was that there are some really good practice learning opportunities and experiences. We heard some really innovative ways of supporting practice learning. There was a clear evidence, good evidence to say that effective communication, strong collaboration and commitment, and that openness to learning, etc., was really important to ensure that there was a supportive and a positive practice learning experience. We also found that there are a number of things that impact on practice learning that aren't within the NMC's remit as a regulator, and we explored those a little bit. We went to council in November of last year with recommendations for the consultation that's now live, and if you want to have a look at those papers in more detail, the links are there. You'll not be surprised to hear that some of the things that are really impacting on practice learning, which are not out with the NMC's role as a regulator of registrants and individuals, were very much linked to finances. There was something around placement capacity. I would just like to make it really clear that we're consulting on things that came out of the key lines of inquiry, and capacity is not the driver for this work. We're looking at the quality of practice learning and how can we support it. But there are challenges around cost of living, for example, for students who are studying for a full-time academic and professional award. They're having to travel to practice learning placements, and they're having to maintain their lives. We as an NMC are the regulator for the 4 countries, so there is some variation in the way things are delivered. But as you know, in England, the students, whilst they get a bursary, are paying their fees. We know that practice providers are in a really financially strapped time as well. There are staffing vacancies, there's all that stuff that's going on there, and an increasing acuity of care across the hospital and the community setting. We also know that within universities, higher education institutions, there's restructuring and in some areas redundancies. And of course, all of those things are impacting on the partnership working between the universities and practice. There's a really strong need to value the contribution of practice supervisors, practice assessors and academic assessors in this climate of change. And whilst as the NMC we can't do anything about that, we can keep telling everybody and raising it in our discussions within that sort of support and influence piece. Although today we're talking about the consultation and the proposals, we are also doing some additional work alongside this to support practice learning. We are going to be developing a position statement around practice learning, talking about the importance of partnership working amongst other things, but really, you know, to give support for people to understand that practice learning opportunities will be many and varied. They're not necessarily by a bedside or with a patient in their home. It might be with the service development team, it might be with the digital team, it might be within the leadership team. It's about how can the students be supported to achieve their proficiencies. We also want to do some work around strengthening the supporting information. Some of the things that came up in discussion and during our key lines of inquiry led us to understand that in some areas the standards are not necessarily understood and applied as they can be. There is quite a lot of flexibility there, but we want to strengthen that information. And alongside that, we'll be looking at the website because we appreciate it's not always the easiest thing to find. And we're going to look at developing some case studies because we heard some great examples of supporting practice learning. So if you're doing something in your area that you think we should know about, then please do let us know. That would be really helpful. So the consultation, we've already talked about the fact it's open now. It closes Thursday next week, the 23rd of July. You can respond as individuals or organisations, and indeed would encourage you to do both. That would be really helpful. So we're consulting on a number of proposals. So the first one is around anti-racism, bias awareness and cultural curiosity. And this is for nursing, midwifery and nursing associate programmes. We really want to look at how we can further strengthen the care received for people who are using services across the lifespan, including women and families, and looking at that. As you know, in May, the NMC published some anti-racism principles. There is also a assessment tool there to do a gap analysis within organisations, and there is the work that's happening around the code review to think about EDI and anti-racism as well. In relation to the pre-registration nursing programmes, we heard quite a lot about the challenges of supporting practice learning for staff who are delivering the service. There's the staff, student wellbeing and mental health around, as we said, their full-time academic and professional award, whilst also trying to live and balance the cost of living requirements, etc. So we're asking the question, and as Jackie said, these are proposals. We're interested in your thoughts about the possibility of the programme hours being reduced to a minimum of 3,600 hours. So 50% theory and 50% practice for those 3,600 hours. Any hours over and above could be proportionate. Wouldn't necessarily have to be 50-50, but we wouldn't be expecting it to be dominated by either theory or practice. We're also asking about a percentage for simulated practice learning. At the moment, up to 600 hours is permitted for simulated practice learning within nursing programmes. Not all universities use that. We appreciate that it's very resource intensive, but we also know that it can give a very authentic practice learning experience, and particularly when service users are involved. And if the programme hours were to reduce to a minimum of 3,600 and there was variation in the length, we think that it should be a percentage for simulated practice learning rather than a magic number, as it were. And the final thing that we're consulting on for the nursing programmes is making it a requirement that all nursing students have a practice learning opportunity within the community setting. We know that many students do. For example, in mental health, it's probably 50-50 between the community and hospital, but this is about ensuring that everybody has a community placement. And this has particularly come from the 4 countries as care continues to move closer to home. For nursing associates, we're asking about the programme standard requirement that the programme is no less than 50% of the programme hours required for a nursing degree. We also, in our standards at the moment, require that it's the equivalent of a foundation degree, which is 2,400 hours. If it was to be 50% of 3,600 hours, that would be well below the foundation degree requirement. So we're asking the question about removing the requirement for it being no less than 50% of the nursing programme. So those are the things that we're asking about for nursing and nursing associate. I'm going to hand over to Jackie now, who'll talk to you about the midwifery programme proposals.
Thanks, Julie. So for midwifery, the proposals are slightly different. We recognise that there are differing views about the number of births that students should have. We are continuing to remain with those numbers for the time being, but we also have heard a lot about when students actually get to sort of double figures, around 30 births, and there is a consideration about whether they are ready to continue to be recommended to join the register on those births, that those particular students are rigorously assessed as to whether they're ready or whether they need to progress towards 40 births. And I think what we've recognised is that that holistic assessment of that competence and confidence in labour and birth for caring for women who have a physiological vaginal birth needs to happen for all students. So it's very much thinking about what a student needs before they actually begin to complete the programme, and very much focusing it more on an individual learning need basis. Interestingly, people have sort of questioned how this would happen. And of course, for England and Northern Ireland, we know in midwifery programmes, they have the same assessment documents. So there is some views that this holistic assessment should be uniform throughout the country. We've also had a lot of comment about whether student midwives have enough experience of caring for women with additional and complex needs. And we do have a standard already about this, but the students can gain these numbers by purely one sort of single episode of care. And we're consulting about whether this could be strengthened and whether that should include the whole continuum of maternity care. And we're really welcoming views on how this could be done. Since 2017-18, there's been a lot of discussion about the length of the programme. At that time, there was differing views. There was definitely a feeling that the increase in the proficiencies that students need to meet means that a 3-year programme makes it very tight and challenging. And I think this discussion hasn't really gone away. So we are consulting again on this, but it's worth saying that we are having parallel discussions. We know, and we've heard this a lot, about the finances. And we're having parallel discussions with other stakeholders to see how this could be operationalised, particularly focusing on the financial implications of it. But in terms of the consultation, we're seeking views on whether it should be extended. Thank you, Julie. Irrespective of whether we extend or not, we also are considering introducing a final placement of a minimum of 8 weeks for all students to better support their transition to registered practice. Interestingly, this is already done in Wales and it's evaluated very well. And we're looking to see whether this should be a requirement. The continuity of supervision we've been overwhelmed really by the response from students when we have undertaken this piece of work. It sort of can't be right that students are having 24 practice supervisors in a 6 to 8 placement. And I heard an interesting number yesterday, Julie, which I might start adopting, that some were having 50 within an assessment period. And of course, this has implications, doesn't it, for the practice supervisor who is signing off proficiencies. And we've heard a lot about failure to fail. Not that the students are failing, but just the practice supervisors can't make these decisions because they haven't worked with the students enough. So we're looking to reintroduce, well, not reintroduce, because we already say that the standards should have some continuity, but maybe strengthen it. And we want some your views about how this could be done. And then simulation is done already across theory within midwifery programmes. But other than perhaps attending a prompt course with their practice supervisor, none of this is actually counted towards practice learning hours. And I think for the hard to achieve proficiencies, if the standards of supervision and assessment were in place, there is an opportunity for some of those activities to contribute towards practice learning hours. Thank you, Julie, and back to you.
Thanks, Jackie. And then there's a couple more proposals which we're also asking about. So under the standards framework for nursing and midwifery education, we're asking about the partnership working and collaborative working in relation to reasonable adjustments. As I said earlier, partnership working came out really strongly as important, that partnership working between practice, the universities, around developing and delivering the programmes. But when we were talking and listening to people about reasonable adjustments, there were concerns, you'll not be surprised to hear, about reasonable adjustments in a university not necessarily translating directly into practice. So 25% of extra time in an exam doesn't necessarily work in practice. The other thing was about the anxiety of students and their reluctance to disclose. So we're asking about how can we strengthen the partnership working between universities, practice and the students in order that this can be discussed and put into place before the placement starts in relation to that. And then the final question that we're asking is related to the standards for student supervision and assessment. At the moment, in order to be a practice assessor for a pre-registration nursing student, you need to be a registered nurse. And we know that there are students who are undertaking some great placements within specialist community public health. For example, they might be having a placement with a health visitor. At the moment, if that health visitor is a registered midwife, they're not able to be a practice assessor for a pre-registration nursing student. So we're asking the question, if the individual has the specialist community public health nursing qualification and they're supporting a pre-registration nursing student within that setting of public health, could a registered midwife be a practice assessor for a nursing student? And those are the things that we're asking about. As we've said, the consultation's live until the 23rd of July. When you fill in the consultation, if there's anything that you disagree with, there'll be a free text box so that you can add why and explain that. And then at the end, there's another free text box. So if there's anything else that you think we've missed or that you feel very strongly that you want to say, please do put it in there. We've got an independent research company who's working with us. They've also undertaken some focus groups and they will be doing the analysis for this. And as Jackie said, we are having conversations with each of the 4 countries to consider any financial implications. Whilst the funding is not necessarily within the gift of the NMC, we need to be mindful of those implications with anything that we take forward. There are a couple of more slides really that just talk about things. We have a monthly drop-in session. The details are there, but Lindsay will share the details with you afterwards. So thank you for giving us the time, Lindsay, to just go through the proposals. I'm very happy now to hand over to you for opening the floor for discussion. Thank you.
Lovely. Just a quick thank you to both Jackie and Julie for their expertise and for coming along to us as a region as well, just to give us this opportunity to ask them questions.